Photo of a fallen soldier in 1944. When enlarged, experts reveal his incredible story, and before continuing, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any new videos. The air conditioning of the National World War II Museum in Washington, D.C. hummed softly while Elena Rodriguez reviewed the dusty boxes from the archive. As a historian specializing in war conflicts, she had seen thousands of war photographs, but something about that image made her stop. The black and white photograph showed a young American soldier fallen in a French trench. His uniform was torn, the military helmet lay a few meters away, and his closed eyes suggested the end of a life cut short in 1944. However, there was something disturbing about the image's composition that Elena couldn't ignore. "Where did this photo come from?" she murmured, turning the image over. On the back, in faded ink, she read, "Unknown soldier, Normandy, France, August 15, 1944. There was no name, no identification number, no reference to military unit. Elena turned on the high-resolution lamp and placed the photograph under the glass. During her 15 years as a historian, she had learned that the most seemingly simple images often hid the deepest secrets. With a magnifying glass, she began examining every detail, the belt buckles, the uniform buttons, the marks on the helmet. It was then that she saw it. In the upper left pocket of the uniform, barely visible, the edge of what appeared to be a folded paper protruded. A letter, perhaps. But what caught her attention most was a small insignia on the uniform's collar that didn't match the standard military divisions of the era. "This doesn't make sense," whispered Elena, feeling her hands begin to tremble slightly. There was something about that photograph that challenged everything she knew about World War II military documentation. The soldier didn't appear in any official record, and that insignia was a mystery she needed to solve. The next day, Elena arrived early at the museum's digital restoration laboratory. Her colleague Marcus Thompson, an expert in historical preservation technology, was already calibrating the high-resolution scanner when she entered with the photograph wrapped in tissue paper. "I need you to enlarge this image as much as possible without losing quality," Elena told him, carefully unwrapping the photograph, "especially this pocket area and this collar insignia." Marcus adjusted his glasses and examined the image. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Something that shouldn't be there," responded Elena, pointing to the anomalies she had detected. "This soldier doesn't appear in any official record, but his uniform has elements that don't match known divisions." The digitization process took several hours. Modern technology allowed them to enlarge details that would have been impossible to see in 1944. While the machine worked, Elena reviewed military files on her laptop, searching for any reference to special operations or undocumented units in the Normandy region. "Ready," announced Marcus, turning the screen toward Elena. "Maximum resolution. You can zoom down to the fabric thread level." Elena approached the screen and began zooming in on the uniform pocket. Indeed, there was a letter partially visible, and on it she could distinguish handwriting. But what really left her breathless was when she enlarged the collar insignia. "My God," she murmured, moving closer to the screen. The insignia showed a symbol she had never seen in military manuals, an eagle with extended wings, but underneath, instead of the typical American shield, there was a small French fleur-de-lis. "What does that mean?" asked Marcus, noticing the expression of amazement on Elena's face. "I don't know," she admitted. "But this suggests that this soldier wasn't who he appeared to be. This insignia seems to indicate some type of joint operation between American and French forces, something that isn't documented in official archives." Elena took a screenshot of the enlargement and saved it in her research folder. She had the feeling she had just discovered something extraordinary, something that could change the historical understanding of military operations in 1944. The National Archives and Records Administration rose imposingly under Washington's gray sky. Elena walked through the marble hallways with determination, carrying a folder with the digital enlargements of the photograph. She had scheduled an appointment with retired Colonel James Mitchell, a specialist in World War II military records. "Dr. Rodriguez," greeted Colonel Mitchell, a gray-haired man with military bearing who remained upright despite his 80 years. "What have you found that has historians so intrigued?" Elena spread the enlargements on the consultation table. "This photograph, Colonel, shows a fallen soldier in Normandy in August 1944, but he doesn't appear in any official record. And this insignia," she pointed to the enlargement of the symbol on the uniform collar. Colonel Mitchell put on his reading glasses and carefully examined the images. His expression gradually changed from professional curiosity to something deeper, recognition mixed with concern. "Where did you find this photograph?" he asked without looking up from the enlargements. "In the museum archives. It was miscatalogued, without specific reference." Mitchell leaned back in his chair and looked seriously at Elena. "Doctor, what you're showing me, this insignia, isn't from any standard military division. It's the symbol of an operation that officially never existed." Elena felt her pulse quickening. What kind of operation? During the last months of 1944, there were rumors about a joint program between the American OSS and the French resistance. It was called Operation White Shadow. Selected American soldiers were infiltrated behind enemy lines, working directly with French resistance cells. The colonel stood up and walked to a window overlooking the National Mall. "The problem is that all records of that operation were classified indefinitely. Officially, it never happened. The soldiers who participated, according to the archives, all died in conventional combat." "Are you saying this soldier was part of a covert mission?" "It's possible, but if so, his death in this photograph could have been fabricated, a way to protect his real identity while he continued operating in occupied territory." Eleanor looked at the photograph again with different eyes. The soldier, who had seemed so peaceful in death, now looked like someone who had been acting, playing the role of a fallen soldier to protect something much more important. The nursing home, Sunset Manor in Virginia, smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers. Elena walked down the main corridor to room 204, where Harold Hank Peterson lived, one of the last living veterans of special operations in France during 1944. At 98 years old, Hank retained surprisingly clear memory. When Elena showed him the enlarged photograph, his blue eyes filled with tears. "Jesus, it's him," he murmured with a trembling voice. "I thought I'd never see that face again." "You knew him?" asked Elena, bringing her digital recorder closer. "Tommy Hartwell, that was his real name. We were 22 when they recruited us for Operation White Shadow." Hank took the photograph with trembling hands. This photo was taken during his first covert mission in occupied territory. Eleanor felt a chill. "Are you saying he didn't die in this trench?" "Hell no. Tommy was the best actor in our group. He could pretend to be dead so well that even German medics would believe it." Hank smiled nostalgically. That was his specialty. He'd play dead, and when the Germans moved away, he'd get up and continue with the mission. What kind of missions? Deep infiltration. He lived entire weeks in occupied territory, establishing communication networks with the French resistance. "That letter you see in his pocket surely contained coordinates or codes for local contacts." Hank leaned back in his bed and closed his eyes. Tommy was from Chicago, had a girlfriend named Mary, and always talked about his family's bakery in Little Italy. After the war, he was supposed to return home to marry her. "What happened to him?" "That's the thing," said Hank, opening his eyes with an expression of pain. "The last time I saw him was in September 1944. He left for a mission near Paris and never returned. They told us he had died in combat, but they never found his body." Eleanor felt the puzzle pieces beginning to fit together. "Do you think he could have survived the war?" "I always had that hope. Tommy was too smart and too careful to die easily. But after the war, when I tried to look for him, it was as if he had never existed. All the records had disappeared." The room fell into silence while Eleanor processed the information. Tommy Hartwell wasn't just an unknown soldier. He was a living ghost, a man who had been erased from official history to protect secrets that now, 70 years later, were beginning to come to light. The icy wind of Lake Michigan whipped through Chicago's streets as Elena walked through the Little Italy neighborhood. She had flown from Washington with a single clue, the Hartwell family bakery that Hank Peterson had mentioned. After consulting historical business records, she had located Hartwell's bakery on Taylor Street, although the business had closed decades ago. The used bookstore that now occupied the location preserved some original elements: the white wall tiles and the marble counter where bread and pastries had once been displayed. Elena entered and approached the owner, a middle-aged Italian man named Giuseppe Rossini. "Hartwell's bakery," repeated Giuseppe, scratching his gray beard. "Yes, my father bought this place from the Hartwell family in 1954. It was a very strange transaction." "Strange in what way?" "Well, the family had disappeared during the war. The bakery had been closed since 1943 until my father bought it. But when he signed the papers, it wasn't with the original Hartwells. It was with a lawyer representing a surviving heir who never appeared in person." Elena felt her heart racing. "Do you know if any member of the Hartwell family survived the war?" "That's the strange thing. The old neighbors in the area always said that Tommy Hartwell had returned briefly after the war, but that he looked different, thinner, with darker hair. Some thought it was another person. Giuseppe led her to the bookstore's basement. When we renovated the place years ago, we found some things the family had left. I thought about throwing them away, but my wife told me to keep them in case someday someone appeared looking for information about the Hartwells. Among boxes of old books, Giuseppe extracted a deteriorated leather suitcase. Here it is. We never opened it out of respect for the family. Eleanor opened the suitcase carefully. Inside were family photographs, handwritten love letters addressed to "My Dear Mary," and personal documents. But what impacted her most was a 1942 family photograph showing the Hartwell parents alongside a young man who was undoubtedly the same soldier from the war photograph. "Tommy Hartwell," murmured Elena. "He really existed." At the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in tissue paper, she found something that left her breathless. A small military insignia identical to the one she had seen in the enlarged photograph, the same eagle with the French fleur-de-lis. "What does this mean?" asked Giuseppe. Elena held the insignia up to the light. "I think it means that Tommy Hartwell not only survived the war but returned home, but for some reason he couldn't reclaim his previous life." The search for Mary O'Connor, Tommy Hartwell's girlfriend, led Elena to the Chicago Tribune newspaper archives. She had found her full name in the love letters kept in the bakery suitcase and now needed to trace what had become of her after the war. The archive librarian, an elderly woman named Dorothy Chen, helped Elena review the microfilms from 1945-1950. "Are you looking for obituaries, marriages, or general news?" asked Dorothy. "Any mention of Mary O'Connor? She would have been between 20 and 25 years old at the end of the war." After hours of searching, Elena found what she was looking for, a small social note in the June 3, 1947 edition. "Mary O'Connor marries Robert Sullivan at St. Alphonsus Church. The bride, a nurse at Mercy Hospital, met her husband during her volunteer service with war veterans." "Interesting," murmured Elena. "She married 2 years after the war ended, but why didn't she wait for Tommy?" Dorothy found more references. In 1948, Mary Sullivan Jr. was born, followed by 2 more children in 1950 and 1952. The Sullivan family seemed to have lived a normal life in a Chicago suburb until in 1965, another newspaper note caught Elena's attention. Robert Sullivan, public accountant, died unexpectedly at 43 years old. He is survived by his wife Mary and their 3 children. "Widowed young," commented Dorothy. "It must have been difficult raising 3 children alone." Elena continued searching and found something extraordinary in the 1967 archives, a small note in the local news section that made her hold her breath. "Mary Sullivan reports encounter with supposed war veteran." The Lincoln Park area widow contacted authorities after a man claiming to be Thomas Hartwell, presumed dead in France in 1944, appeared at her door. The man was escorted from the property by local police. Elena felt her heart racing. "Is there more information about this incident?" Dorothy reviewed the available police archives. Here it is. Police report from March 15, 1967. A man approximately 45 years old, identifying himself as Thomas Hartwell, was found loitering around Mary Sullivan's residence in Lincoln Park. When Mrs. Sullivan saw him, she apparently fainted from shock. The man was temporarily detained, but released when no charges were found to file. "Is there a physical description of the man?" "Yes. Medium height, brown hair with premature gray, visible scar on left cheek, slight limp in right leg. He spoke with a Midwest accent, but with inflections suggesting time spent abroad." Elena looked at the 1942 photograph of Tommy Hartwell and tried to imagine him 25 years later. The description matched perfectly how the young soldier would have aged. What happened next? According to the report, the man told Mrs. Sullivan that he had been fulfilling a mission that had finally ended and that now he could return home. She insisted that her fiancé had died in the war and that she had rebuilt her life. Eleanor closed her eyes, imagining the tragedy of that encounter. Tommy Hartwell had returned after more than 20 years, only to discover that the world he had left behind no longer existed. Back in Washington, Elena decided she needed access to classified OSS archives. She contacted Senator Richard Hayes, who had supported several of the museum's historical research projects and had influence on intelligence committees. "Dr. Rodriguez," said Senator Hayes from his Capitol office, "what you're asking me is extraordinarily difficult. The Operation White Shadow archives remain classified after 80 years. Senator, I believe we have evidence that an American soldier was kept in covert operations for more than 20 years after the war ended. His family believed him dead. His girlfriend married another man and he lived as a ghost. Eleanor showed him all the evidence she had gathered, the enlarged photographs, Hank Peterson's testimony, the bakery artifacts, and the records of the encounter with Mary Sullivan in 1967. Senator Hayes studied the documents carefully. Are you suggesting that the CIA kept this man on active missions during the Cold War? It's the only logical explanation. Tommy Hartwell was an expert in deep infiltration. During the Cold War, those skills would have been invaluable for operations in Eastern Europe. After several days of negotiations, Senator Hayes managed to obtain limited access to recently declassified archives. Elena found herself in a secure room of the federal building, with a security officer watching every document she reviewed. The archives confirmed her deepest suspicions. Operation White Shadow hadn't ended with the conclusion of World War II. It had evolved into something much bigger, a network of sleeper agents operating throughout Europe during the early Cold War years. Hartwell, Thomas H., appeared in multiple reports between 1945 and 1967. He had been in Berlin during the Soviet blockade, in Hungary during the 1956 revolution, and in Czechoslovakia during the Prague Spring. His specialty had remained deep infiltration and establishing communication networks. A 1967 memorandum finally explained his release. Agent Hartwell requests termination of active service, citing operational fatigue and desire for civilian reintegration. Recommendation: approve request with condition of perpetual silence maintenance regarding past activities. Elena understood the complete tragedy. Tommy Hartwell had served his country for more than 20 years, in missions that officially never existed. When he was finally released, the world he had known no longer existed for him. Elena had located Mary Sullivan Jr., Tommy Hartwell's former girlfriend. Now a 75-year-old woman living in a nursing home in Evanston, Mary Jr. had agreed to meet with Elena after she explained her research over the phone. My mother never talked much about what happened that day in 1967, said Mary Jr., serving tea in the nursing home's common room. But I remember she was very disturbed for weeks. She said she had seen a ghost. Elena showed her the original photograph of the soldier and the digital enlargements. Did your mother tell you anything about Tommy Hartwell? Only that he had been the love of her life before the war. She kept all his letters until the day she died in 1998. When I found them among her belongings, I finally understood why she had never talked much about my biological father. Elena straightened in her chair. Your biological father? My official father was Robert Sullivan, who raised me as if I were his own daughter. But the dates never added up. I was born in February 1948, exactly 9 months after that man appeared at our door in 1967. Mary Jr. paused. Wait, that's not right. Let me recalculate. Eleanor waited patiently while Mary Jr. reflected. I was born in 1948, but my mother married Robert Sullivan in June 1947. If that man who appeared in 1967 was really Tommy Hartwell, Mary Jr. stopped with tears in her eyes. My God, do you think he could have returned briefly after the war? Did your mother keep anything else besides the letters? Mary Jr. disappeared for a few minutes and returned with a wooden box. I found this after she died. I never understood what it meant. Inside the box was another military insignia identical to those Elena had seen, along with a photograph of a middle-aged man who was clearly Tommy Hartwell, but 20 years older. On the back of the photograph, in Mary O'Connor's handwriting, was written, Tommy, Paris, 1965. See you soon. Your mother was in Paris in 1965. Yes, she said she had won a church contest for a trip to Europe. But now that I think about it, my mother had never participated in contests, and when she returned, she had a sadness in her eyes that never left her. Elena understood that the story was even more complex than she had imagined. Tommy Hartwell and Mary O'Connor had maintained secret contact for decades, but Cold War circumstances had made it impossible for them to be together publicly. With all the puzzle pieces in place, Elena returned to Washington to write her final report. She had discovered a story that went beyond a simple unknown soldier. She had found evidence of one of the most secret intelligence programs in American history. In her museum office, Elena organized all the documents, photographs, and testimonies she had collected during months of investigation. The original photograph of the fallen soldier, now had a completely different meaning. Tommy Hartwell hadn't died in that trench in 1944. He had faked his death as part of an elaborate infiltration operation that had extended for more than 2 decades. The letter in his pocket had contained codes to contact the French resistance, and the special insignia had been his credential for a spy network that had operated in absolute secrecy. Eleanor wrote in her report, "Thomas J. Hartwell represents a generation of American soldiers who sacrificed not only their lives, but their very identity in service to their country. Officially dead since 1944, he continued operating as an undercover agent during the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. The investigation had revealed that Tommy had maintained secret contact with Mary O'Connor for decades, meeting with her clandestinely in Paris in 1965. When he was finally released from his obligations in 1967, he had tried to reclaim his previous life, but the world had changed too much. His attempt to reconnect with Mary in 1967 was the final act of a man who had lived as a ghost for 23 years, Elena wrote. She had rebuilt her life, had a family, and publicly recognizing him would have compromised decades of classified operations. Elena included a recommendation in her report. Thomas J. Hartwell deserves posthumous recognition for his extraordinary service. His story illustrates the human cost of intelligence operations and the need to honor those who served in the shadows. The photograph that had begun as an image of an unknown soldier fallen in combat now revealed itself as the portrait of a hero who had lived multiple lives in service to his country, sacrificing his personal identity for national security. 6 months after completing her investigation, Elena received an unexpected call. It was from David Hartwell, a 60-year-old man living in Portland, Oregon, who had seen an article about her research in the local newspaper. "Dr. Rodriguez," said David with a trembling voice, "I think Tommy Hartwell was my father." Elena flew to Portland that same week. David received her in his home, a modest house filled with family photographs and military memorabilia. He was a medium-height man with the same blue eyes and gentle smile that Elena had seen in Tommy's photographs. "My mother was named Claire Morrison," David explained. "She was a nurse at a veterans hospital in Portland after the war. She always told me my father had died in France, but never gave me specific details." David showed Elena a shoebox full of letters. "I found these after my mother died in 2010. They're dated between 1948 and 1967, all signed with the initial T." Elena read the letters with growing excitement. They were from Tommy Hartwell, written from different European cities, describing a life of loneliness and dangerous missions, but always expressing his love for Claire and his desire to meet his son. "In the last letter," said David, "he wrote that he had finally been released from his obligations and that he would come home. That letter is dated February 1967. Did he come?" "Yes. My mother told me years later that a man appeared at our door in March 1967. She had sent me to stay with my grandmother that week. When I returned, she was completely changed, sadder, but also more at peace." David led Elena to the garage, where he had been restoring a classic car. "After reading your research, I searched my mother's attic. I found this." It was a leather suitcase identical to the one Elena had found in Chicago, but this one contained more recent documents, passports with different names, photographs of Tommy in various European cities, and a final letter addressed to David. "My dear son," Elena read aloud, "if you're reading this, it means you finally found the truth about your father. I served my country for 23 years in missions that can never be publicly recognized. My greatest regret is not having known you, but my greatest pride is knowing you grew up to be a good man thanks to your mother." The letter continued, "I have left evidence of my service in a safe place. Someday, when appropriate, the complete story can be told. Until then, know that every day of my life after 1944 was lived with the hope of returning home to you and your mother." Elena finished reading with tears in her eyes. Tommy Hartwell had been the father of at least 2 children with 2 different women, both nurses who had cared for war veterans, both who had kept his secret for decades. "What happened to him after 1967? asked Elena. David smiled sadly. "According to my mother, he lived his last years in a small cabin in the Oregon mountains under the name Thomas Morrison. He died in 1987 and is buried in a local cemetery with a headstone that simply says, 'War Veteran.'" Elena visited Thomas Morrison's grave in Mount Hood Cemetery, Oregon. The simple headstone contrasted with the complexity of the life he had lived. But next to the grave, Elena found something that finally completed the circle of her investigation. Fresh flowers and a small black and white photograph. It was the original photograph of the fallen soldier in 1944. But now Elena knew it didn't show a death, but a rebirth. Tommy Hartwell had died that day to be able to live as a ghost in service to his country, sacrificing his personal identity for a greater cause. His story isn't just about an unknown soldier, Elena wrote in her final report. It's about the human cost of secret service, about the men and women who live and die in the shadows to protect the freedoms we take for granted. The photograph, which had begun as a mystery in a museum's archives, had now become a testament to sacrifice, love, and patriotism. Tommy Hartwell had lived 3 lives: as the young baker from Chicago who fell in love with Mary O'Connor, as the undercover agent who operated in darkness for decades, and finally as the father who could only meet his son in his final years. Eleanor arranged for the photograph to be exhibited in the museum with a plaque that read, "To the unknown heroes who served in the shadows." It didn't mention Tommy Hartwell's name, respecting the secrecy he had maintained throughout his life, but honoring his sacrifice and that of all who had served like him. David Hartwell donated his father's letters to the museum, where they would be preserved for future generations. Mary Sullivan Jr. did the same with her mother's belongings, creating a complete archive of a love story that had transcended decades and continents. The last entry in Elena's research journal read, "Sometimes the most extraordinary stories hide in the most ordinary images. A photograph can contain secrets that change our understanding of the past and remind us that the greatest heroes are those whose names we will never know." The photograph of the fallen soldier in 1944 had finally revealed its incredible story. It wasn't the image of an ending, but of a beginning, the beginning of a life completely dedicated to service, sacrifice, and silent love for a country that could never publicly recognize his contribution. Tommy Hartwell had finally found his rest, but his legacy would live forever in the museum archives, reminding all visitors that history is full of anonymous heroes whose stories wait to be discovered by those brave enough to look closer.